Hello, my name is Alexis Dill, and today we will be doing a study overview on research of syringe service programs and their effectiveness on the community and those who participate in SSPs. So what is a syringe service program? Well, also known as SSPs, they are programs that allow people who inject drugs, or PWID, access to clean syringes when using. They also provide access to disease testing, vaccinations, and overdose kits. These kits include naloxone, which is an opioid antagonist. This means the use of naloxone reverses the effects of an opioid. Although it cannot be used to end the overdose, it basically keeps the overdose at a halt, giving enough time to contact emergency services to save the person enduring an overdose. These programs, in effect, can decrease the spread of diseases such as HIV or hepatitis C. Contracting HIV is at high risk with used syringes, so by providing clean ones and taking dirty ones off the streets, the spread of HIV can be prevented. All right, and this is the study that we'll be going over today, Understanding the Public Health Consequences of Suspending a Rural Syringe Services Program, a qualitative study of the experiences of people who inject drugs. The authors, for the most part, are professionals who work for the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, Maryland, specifically in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society, Department of Pediatrics, Department of Health Policy and Management, and the Department of Mental Health. Allison O'Rourke in particular works for the Department of Psychology at George Washington University and the DC Center for AIDS Research in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to go ahead and specify where the study's SSP took place, which was in Kanawha Charleston Health Department in Charleston, West Virginia. So the author's purpose for this study was to identify the consequences of suspending this SSP while also presenting the effects it had on past participants, specifically PWID. And I also believe that the purpose is to show how important SSPs can be in a community, especially with a high risk of HIV or a high percentage of PWID areas. The research questions included basically surrounded the participants' experience while the SSP was active. Specifically, the researchers focused on access to sterile injection equipment, resources for overdose prevention, injection practices, and the risk of diseases among them. While there was no hypothesis stated in the study, I could imagine the researchers hypothesized that the consequences and effects on participants would be very negative, as in a decrease in safe practices when injecting drugs, or that the public health would be in jeopardy. The methods used in the research were semi-structured but in-depth interviews that lasted about 45 to 75 minutes. The sample that was used included 27 PWID within Kanawha County that were 18 or older. The subjects were found within areas in Charleston known to have a high percentage of PWID populations. There were 16 males and 11 females, mostly Caucasian and homeless. So the results were then organized in 6 broad categories of discussion, including community-based stigmatization before, during, and after the program suspension towards PWID, the experiences participating in these KCHD SSP, access to sterile injection equipment during and after the SSP suspension, risk behaviors endured after suspension, HIV risk among PWID while using, and finally the availability of naloxone during and after suspension. So for the next 6 slides, I included quotes received from participants in the study. I'm not going to read all word for word, but I am going to generalize and use examples from what was said to show the effects of the SSP. Like I stated earlier, participants spoke about stigmatization towards themselves before, during, and after the SSP was implemented. Researchers were actually saddened by what they heard from participants. The community was very hurtful towards PWID based on the fact they used drugs. Many saw them as uneducated and disgusting. There was even a Facebook group created solely for posting rude comments towards PWID in the area. I pulled this quote specifically because it reveals how anyone can be a PWID, and generalizing all is wrong. This 41-year-old female was actually a college graduate and had a job, a home, and a better life until 2018. Yet with all this criteria, she ran through some issues and is now a user. She states many assume all PWID are uneducated and homeless, but that is far from the truth. Many participants had nothing but great things to say about the program when talking about experience. Many reflect how they felt as a person, as someone with importance while participating. The staff was very welcoming and non-judgmental towards their habits and care for their well-being. You could say the SSP gave a sign of hope for PWID. After suspension, many participants encountered problems gaining access to sterile equipment. One 29-year-old male stated how it's nearly impossible to find unused syringes in the area. While finding sterile syringes was difficult, PWID participated in different routes of administration such as smoking to avoid using dirty syringes. Some even disclosed their health status when sharing. Finally, one stated people need the high so desperately, some PWID don't care about the safety issue and eventually take used syringes. Female participants focused on the higher risk of contracting HIV after the SSP was closed. Male participants admitted to using dirty syringes frequently after the suspension. One 35-year-old male stated he didn't care about using dirty needles, especially if having intercourse with the person. He said, quote, "We're still doing it anyways," end quote. Finally, participants discussed how inaccessible naloxone was without the SSP's Narcan program. A 39-year-old female states she witnessed 12 overdoses and how helpful the Narcan training and having naloxone on standby was. One 29-year-old male then said how no PWID have naloxone on them anymore. This increases a huge risk of an overdose-related death to occur. The study implications were to promote the presence of SSPs, especially in rural or high drug use areas. Naturally, SSPs implement decreases in disease spread among these communities while preventing unhealthy injection practices. There were a few limitations in the study. For starters, this study was based on residents in the Charleston area only, instead of the entire Kanawha County area. However, they stated they could imagine how many more PWID areas have been affected due to this SSP closure. Next, as shown before, almost 90% of the participants were Caucasian, which limited ability to compare differences among racial groups. Lastly, 6 participants interviewed did not actually participate in the SSP. However, they were interviewed for their knowledge of the health and overdose prevention tactics pushed while the program was active, and how they benefited from the services indirectly. I don't believe there necessarily needs to be a policy change unless discussing the Kanawha County area specifically. I do believe there needs to be an expansion of SSPs in more areas around the U.S. due to the rise of overdoses related to opioid use. By exposure to reality, the researcher stated how more people need to understand what addiction is, and though it may be dangerous, there doesn't need to be a stigmatization from the public towards PWID. Instead of being intolerant, become aware and helpful. And simply by expanding SSPs, especially in high-risk areas for drug overdose and HIV spreading, public health will no longer be at risk. And while discussing this study, I wanted to go ahead and share what my personal experience was with SSPs. Personally, I have had firsthand experience with them because I actually interned with a coalition in the area that provides these types of programs. The Memphis Area Prevention Coalition does a syringe exchange program around the downtown Memphis area and provides overdose kits, testing, clean syringes, and recommendations to recovery programs in the area. Since February 2018, when Nashville started the first SSP in Tennessee, there have been more SSPs created across the state. The participants in these programs create a bond with the workers and want to be safe users, and I think these programs are beneficial to the public and PWID in a very meaningful way. And finally, these are my references. Thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation. This subject is very important to me, and I'm glad I get the opportunity to discuss this amongst others and hopefully share some insight on the great things SSPs can do for communities. Thank you.